Welcome to the For the Love of the Game podcast on the trade deadline edition. Not only the trade deadline edition, it's our 20th episode. It's a big milestone for us right here. How are you feeling, Brian?
Oh man, it seems like it worked out too well that the trade deadline episode is the 20th episode. We've been pretty good on being consistent and everything. I'm really proud of us. And I've just been having a lot of fun doing this. So I'm looking forward to this specific episode with a lot of huge news. And yeah, I'm ready. What about you, Jeff? How you doing?
Oh, I'm so ready. We teased it a couple weeks ago about how big of a trade deadline we thought this year was going to be, and it did not cease to amaze. Like, we got a lot of trades, we got a lot of player movements, new face, same. Let me say that again. Old faces, new places. A lot of teams got better, and a lot of teams didn't. And we'll talk about that as well. So we'll talk about some teams that decided to booster their chances for a championship this season, and then some teams that decided to stand pat, and then some teams that just decided, hey, for the sake of a trade, we're making a trade.
Yep.
So
Oh man.
this should be a good one. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right. So, first trade we're going to discuss today is actually a trade that didn't come exactly on the deadline. There's a few trades that didn't come exactly on the trade deadline, but the first one we wanted to discuss is the Karis LeVert acquisition from the Cavs from the Pacers. It was rumored for a couple weeks that the Cavs were very interested in getting Karis LeVert, and they were able to get it done. And I'll just run through the details of that specific trade. So the Cavs get Karis LeVert, second round 2022 pick via Miami, and then the Pacers got Ricky Rubio, a first round draft pick that was lottery protected. I'm sure that's not going to happen with the Cavs this year. And a 22 second round picks, one via the Houston Rockets, and I'm assuming that one came from the Harden trade of last year, and one from Utah. How do you feel about that, Brian?
So this trade is actually really good for the Cavs. I think this is amazing for the Cavs. What did they end up giving up? They ended up giving Ricky Rubio, who was pretty much done for this year. I mean, he is done for this year. He wasn't going to play again. He was actually really instrumental in the Cavs playing so well. So it is sad to see like a player like this go down and not be on the team anymore. But to really like looking at the Cavs, I mean, are they going to win this year? Win the championship? I don't know. I think I wouldn't. I'd have them maybe on the top of like that second tier of contenders, but getting someone like Karis LeVert is pretty huge. I mean, Karis LeVert, very good player. They he's played with Jared Allen before, of course, on the Brooklyn Nets, so they already have that little chemistry. Um, I think it's pretty gigantic for this team, especially too with like for the Cavs, Colin Sexton being down and all this. It just gives them a little more extra firepower, and like this team started off as a team that like no one really thought was going to be that talented or anything like that. But looking at it now, like this team is pretty stacked. And what you give up really one first round picks and two second round picks, like that's and it's you also actually get a second round pick in return. This is pretty amazing for the Cavs. For the Pacers, it's kind of sad to see like you traded Victor Oladipo essentially for Karis LeVert, and then you get in return realistically one first round pick, and it's like it's nothing crazy. It's not the biggest return you would love to see, especially for like a talent of Karis LeVert, even though he does have his injury problems. Uh, yeah, Jeff, what do you think?
First, you got to talk about the background of this. There's a person in this situation that is not getting enough praise about this, and it's the GM of the Cavs, Kobe Altman. He's been with the organization for over close to 10 years now. He was a part of David Griffin's staff, when they won the championship, and he was kind of dealt a bad hand when he first got there, when he was first given the position. For him to essentially turn around the team from what it is, what it was, and as early as like 2018, to what it is now is very, very telling about what type of GM he is. He's making all the right decisions. He's hitting all the right buttons right now. But there is some clear winners. The clear winners in my mind is him. It clearly is Karis LeVert because he, like you said, he gets to play with someone that he's comfortable with and he has a history with, and Jared Allen. The Cavs got exponentially better in my mind in the sense of finding another guy that can be a bucket when you need it late in the game. And that's very important. That's very important for a team like the Cavs. The clear loser, but is still on the Cavs side, is Colin Sexton. It starts to look as where does he fit in when he comes back? Is he I believe he's an unrestricted, or either he is a restricted free agent this summer. So when he comes back after his injury, do the Cavs still want to go with him or move away from him is a big question on this one. But as for the Pacers, looking on that side, you mentioned Ricky Rubio's out for the season. We have seen that in this trade deadline. There has been a number of guys that are injured that got moved. So this isn't the most it's not confusing or questionable that they did that, but they were able to bring back some draft considerations back onto their side, and try to bolster their team in that sense, and then help their team with getting a viable backup point guard after Malcolm Brogdon for when he comes back. I think that's a good trade for him too. So I wouldn't say there's a clear loser in this one, but if I was going to say who won the most, in my mind, it would be the Cavs.
Yeah, so like one, you mentioned him, Colin Sexton. So this season he's eligible for an extension. So going into the following season, he's going to be a restricted free agent. For Ricky Rubio, this is his last contract season, so it's pretty crazy. He signed a 3-year, $51 million contract. He signed that with the Suns, and then he got traded to Minnesota, and then from Minnesota he got traded to the Cavs, and now he's on the Pacers. But like, so pretty much for the Pacers, they're just opening up their salary cap for next season, and it's gonna be kind of like a theme for the rest of this podcast and this trade deadline of like, you see how important expiring deals actually are, because this is what makes teams want to facilitate these deals. No one wants to trade somebody that's going to be sitting on their bench and then eating up the rest of their salary cap. Like, a lot of teams are trying to open up salary caps and pay less money. So it is pretty interesting. Like you're saying, no real clear loser other than probably Colin Sexton.
Yeah.
So I wonder if they try to look to trade him or anything like that going forward, if they give him that extension that he's going to be looking for. There's not a ton of room for him unless you want to move, like, just make Karis play the 3 and Colin Sexton play the 2. But even still, like, not the biggest fan of that.
So honestly, I have a thought process that because it has been touched upon earlier in the year with rumors of a player that could at some point be moved, but this player, it's not like he's asking to be traded. It's more of like the fit, and they're trying to give way to another young star to control the team. Is Shea. What I would love to see what the Cavs could do about facilitating a trade where Shea is brought there. They could use Colin Sexton. I know they've talked about. There has been rumors about like if he left, Colin Sexton would go to the Thunder, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure they probably thought of it as like pairing the both of them, but I think it's really viable for the Cavs to see if there's any willingness to bring back a player like Shea. Because like think about that, Shea, Garland, Karras, Evan, and then Jared Allen. That's a stellar young starting five, you know. And then you have leadership coming off the bench with Rondo. Like a lot of people forget about that trade earlier in the season, and he's being, he's being the leader that he typically has shown to be to help these guys right the ship and be in the right position they need to be.
Yeah, I mean, even just I don't know, thinking about it, I really don't see the Thunder trading Shea for like anything. I think they got a super young star right now that's tearing up the league, one of the best drivers to the rim in the entire NBA. Of like, I see it pretty tough for them to trade him, but hey, you never know. Do you want to move on to the next trade though?
Yes, I do. So our next trade that we'll discuss is a trade between the Trailblazers and the Pelicans. It looked like early on in the week that this was going to be the biggest trade that came down. And as we go on the line, you're going to see there's a lot more shocking trades that came down. But this trade consisted of the Pelicans getting a lot more veteran help that they needed, and then the Blazers getting an assortment of picks, but not only just picks, some talent. But I'll be the one to start off and say that there's a clear winner in this one. So I'll go through the details, and then we could go from there. So the details first is the Pelicans got C.J. McCollum, Larry Nance Jr., Tony Snell, and the Blazers got Josh Hart, Alexander Walker, Thomas Saransky, and then Didi Lozade. I hope I said that right. And they also got a 2022 first round pick that is protected, but there's no specification on the protections. A 2026 second round pick, whichever is a better between the two teams is how they're just going to do a swap, and then a 2027 second round swap as well. So what do you think, Brian?
This one, like you're saying, for the Pelicans, it's actually a good deal because you honestly don't give up too much. I mean, the best player in this entire deal is probably Nickeil Alexander-Walker, not even Josh Hart. So like you give up really one of your solid role players, and then you get back CJ McCollum, Larry Nance, Tony Snell. That's a pretty solid return. It's for the Blazers. There was the report from Woj that said what the Blazers are trying to do, they're trying to clear up as much cap space as possible, so that during this next off season they're able to sign as many free agents as possible to pair up with Damian Lillard. Um, I don't think that's actually going to work because I don't know if the Blazers have like looked at this free agency class where there's really like no great talent out there other than maybe Jalen Brunson. Um, so there really is not much available. So this is kind of like the whole plan for the Blazers. We talked about this last week with the Powell trade and Covington, and like it doesn't feel right. It doesn't make sense. Long term, it just seems like they're just trying to get rid of every single player on their team. And I don't really see how this really helps them too much. For the Pelicans, it's pretty huge going forward, especially if you have someone like Zion coming back and playing. They're going to be substantially a better team with someone like CJ. Um, I like this for the Pelicans. You get some leadership. You need some leadership veterans in there, and it's really good. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, so definitely was that trade when it went down. That was very confusing, perplexing to see that the Pelicans, I mean, the Blazers moved away from CJ McCollum and really didn't get a return that was adequate in my mind. Not only just that, I do give kudos to the Trailblazers for being transparent with CJ. CJ made it clear when he had his presser that they let him know that they were feeling out trade offers, and they kept them abreast of all of that information, right? So it was good to see that the Blazers did that, right?
Yeah.
And it's probably showing that there's a change that's happening culture wise, but they're not right now. They're not. They don't have. I'm sure they're using an assistant GM right now, but they do not have someone in seat that's supposed to, take all of the blame for this. So a lot of this, like you said, seems like they are piecing out a lot of the things to get more space. I think their goal, or what they think they're going to get from this, is they're going to allow Dame to say, hey, you know what? Open the books, show them all of the players that are available, and say, who do you think fits with us? And that's how they're going to operate within this offseason. I think that's a good idea, but ultimately, will I think that will pan out to success? I don't know. I don't think that there's a team you could create with this offseason that will be a championship contender, especially when you trade away one of your best assets. So I like what we mentioned now on the Pelican side, they're getting a guy like CJ McCollum that has willed his team to victory before, that has that veteran sense to know what it means to be in the playoffs, to play hard, to give it your all and right the ship, right? Pairing him against BI and Zion when healthy is going to look good, but does it stand up against the rest of the West? Only time could tell. Only time will be able to tell, but they've bolstered themselves up a lot more than we thought they could have. And for even to slide in Larry Nance into that trade after the fact as well too is another good piece to have on your team and be able to work with. So I'm happy with where the Pelicans are. I've been critical about David Griffin in the past, so I'll give him this one. He had a good trade and he clearly won the trade this time.
Yeah, with you mentioned of like, are the Pelicans good enough to actually win or and compete this year? The answer is really just no. What I think this is more about is like development for your young stars. So Brandon Ingram is only 24 years old. You still he's not even close to his prime yet. So yet now he gets under someone who's a really great leader in CJ McCollum. Gets to learn from him. Zion's only 21. Like these guys, their window's not even close. So it's really at this moment just about developing and gathering some more talent. So for them, I think it's pretty good. And I think for the Blazers, this is just a clear story or a clear example of like waiting too long to trade somebody. They waited way too long to trade CJ McCollum. They could have gotten so much more if they traded him 2-3 years ago. Even last year, they probably could have got way more. But instead, they waited until everything blew up over there. It was a disaster. They lost their GM. They lost all this. So this is what happens. This is a clear example of what not to do. So I feel pretty bad for Blazers fans going forward. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to add here?
No, I think that's it. I think we hit everything.
Yeah, it's crazy. Actually, one thing, looking at this free agent class, the only guy here that like looks pretty solid or is a good player that doesn't have a player option that someone's going to opt into. So like John Wall has an $42 million player option. He's going to pick that up. Westbrook has a $41 million player option. He's going to pick that up. Bradley Beal has a $35 million. He potentially could pick that up or not. Kyrie Irving has his, but like we don't see him leaving or anything like that. But then next, the unrestricted free agent people of like Zach LaVine. I don't. If Zach LaVine does leave Chicago, he's not going to the Trailblazers. And then after that, you have like Gary Harris, Goran Dragic, Ricky Rubio, Iguodala, Pat Beverly. Like the list drops off so hard, and there's no one here. So like I just don't understand why they want to build this offseason. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, like we said, it's a puzzling trade, a series of puzzling trades. So you're just, I will save my criticism for them until we see what they do. But it doesn't look right.
Yeah, as of now, it doesn't look good. So yeah, like you're saying, we'll see what the big picture is, but short term or even us speculating long term doesn't look nice. Let's move on to the Kings and the Pacers trade.
All right, so the Kings have traded for Sabonis, a player that was rumored to have been moved for some time. And actually, I think out of I think it was 2 or 3 players that they rumored that they were ready to move away from, and he was actually the only one that came into fruition. And it now is telling because I don't think, like I said, this is a trade where there's a clear winner or loser yet. I like both returns on both sides, and I think that they both help out both organizations a lot. So going into the details is the Pacers got Tyrese Halliburton, which I forgot to mention is definitely the biggest surprise trade of all of them that we saw during this week. So Tyrese Halliburton, they got Buddy Hield, and they got Tristan Thompson. The Kings got back Domantas Sabonis, Justin Holiday, Jeremy Lamb, and a 2023 second-round pick. What do you think about this, Brian?
So like you're saying, I don't know if there's a real clear loser yet. If anything, at first glance, the Kings have to kind of feel a little bit like losers. Although, so it's pretty funny. I went to the Kings subreddit as soon as this trade dropped, and everyone there was freaking out. They were so upset. They're like, I'm never being a Kings fan again. I am leaving this team. They've done wrong. The only player that actually wanted to be here and change the culture, they traded away like nothing. He was our best guy. He's this and that. Like, fans were so upset. And then Sabonis played his first game. And and the duo of Fox and Sabonis actually looked pretty decent. It looked pretty good. And already you had De'Aaron Fox. There's a iconic image already of like De'Aaron Fox hugging Sabonis like Steve Nash did with KD. And like Kings fans loved it. They were going crazy in that subreddit saying this is the future. Everyone was so happy there. So going forward, this could actually be a good thing. I think everyone's kind of bringing up the point of like Sabonis doesn't shoot threes. De'Aaron Fox is really bad at shooting threes. De'Aaron Fox is really good at shooting mid-rangers and layups, but terrible at taking threes. So it kind of just like that pairing right there doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel good long term. Can it work out? Sure. Sabonis is probably one of the best, probably like top 3. I'd say like post players in the NBA. I mean, 'cause that's where he makes his career. Uh,
Yep.
for the Pacers, I think this is great. I think this is probably the best case scenario you could have gotten. Now, Buddy Hield, I'm not huge on Buddy Hield or anything like that. He actually played a great game for them last night, I think it was. Um, Tristan Thompson is just to throw it in there. But Halliburton, going forward, Halliburton is definitely a piece you can see being pretty huge for the Pacers' future. Pairing him up with, depending if you want to trade Brogdon, but if Brogdon stays, pairing him up with him, pairing him up with Duarte, like this is that's a really good backcourt right there. You can be pretty happy with that going forward. What are your thoughts on this trade?
Yeah, no, I agree. They have a stellar amount of wings. I mean, guards at this point, a mixture of wings as well too,
Yeah,
because
it's
they have
combos.
a little bit of combos. Yeah, that is going on with their team. So uh, I like that. I like the pairing of all those pairings that you mentioned. I really do enjoy and want to see what that turns into. What I'm scared of, obviously, is what does this push the needle in any way? I don't think so for this season because the East is just too good, right?
Yeah.
So it may not lead to them going to the playoffs. It may lead to them being in the play-in, but it might not lead to an actual playoff berth. So that's the interesting part of it. Like you said, Tristan Thompson is a shoo-in. I know I saw some reports maybe he gets bought out. So that'll be interesting to see. But Buddy Hield, he's not the same player that we thought he was going to be when he joined, when he was drafted. But granted, he was in basketball Alcatraz and Sacramento. So let's see what a new city provides him, like what type of energy it brings to him. But now on the Kings side of things, Sabonis, you mentioned it. Like everyone flipped the switch on how they felt about Sabonis. Sabonis is like one of those type of players you may never get the credit or the talk about all the time, but when you watch his game, it's just so consistent what he does and does it so well. It may be an outdated version of what the NBA expects out of a big man, but he does it so well is why he's still a consistent part of being on a team and being in consideration for all-star caliber player, you know. The awkward part about this whole trade for the Kings is that they got Justin Holiday. And many may not know is that Sacramento and the Warriors and Golden State, which is in Oakland, actually they're not in Oakland anymore; they're in San Fran, but have a similar mandate to New York City. And unlucky for Justin Holiday, just like Kyrie Irving, has decided to exercise his right not to take the vaccine. And because of that, this shall compromise his chances of being at home games. So that's a really interesting part of having him shoot into the trade because like it's a different story when you have Kyrie Irving playing half your games
Mm-hmm.
and Justin Holiday playing half your games. So that is very, very interesting to me. Jeremy Lamb, a good pickup. He's always been a serviceable backup, and then they got a pick that ultimately we never know what a second round pick's going to be. There's a lot of uncertainty with what could come from a second round pick. But as of right now, I really would say that both teams are winners. Like they found a way to make it work for both of their teams.
Yeah, that's actually that's so funny that you brought up the Justin Holiday thing. I did not hear about that at all. And like it's funny how big of a deal it is, like you're saying, for Kyrie and all the criticism he gets, but like since this is in the Sacramento Kings, like no one really cares, no one really talks about it. Um that's pretty crazy to see. But yeah, I think this trade is like more of like a to be determined, but it feels like at the moment both sides do win both sides are happy with what they got. I know Pacers fans should probably be like ecstatic with Tyrese Halliburton, so that should be interesting. Do you want to move on to the next trade?
Yes, I am ready.
Okay, so I can take this one. So this is the next one we're going to talk about is pretty much essentially the Joe Ingles trade. We don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's a 3-team trade. So the teams are the Jazz, the Blazers again, and the Spurs. So the Jazz get Nickeil Alexander Walker. So already the Blazers are throwing him out of there. Juancho Hernan Gomez. And then the Blazers get Joe Ingles, which is probably the biggest person we'll talk about here. Elijah Hughes, second round pick. Spurs get Thomas Satoransky, who also Blazers just said, get out of here. And then a second round pick. Jeff, what do you think about this trade?
Yeah, so when the dust clears, you realize that first initial trade by the Blazers is just Josh Hart, right?
Yep.
So it was a Josh Hart for 3 players trade, and that feels weird when you think about it like that, right? But I will say I do like the addition of Joe Ingles to the Blazers, right? But I don't think that's where the Blazers our deficiency is. It's not shooting.
So he's actually he's an unrestricted free agent. So this only has 1 season, so he's a free agent at the end of the season, and he's injured for the rest of the season. Does that change your thoughts on that?
So that just makes it once again another perplexing trade that you're just like, okay. It looks like they're trying to start to set up an expired contract like situation where they're always in conversation for having enough cap room to get someone, and that's what they want to do. But how long till Dame says enough is enough? Because like this is ridiculous. It's like just now adding what you said and thinking about that as well. And then just thinking about, we talked about it the last episode. They have a slew of guards, and they cannot defend because they have a slew of guards. Like they really, it's upsetting, and you've seen how like it's reflected on their defensive stats. Like I don't have the exact defensive ratings that they have, but they are bottom tier defensively because they just don't have the size to compete with other teams. So that's interesting to see that they would not be looking into bringing someone that's big. I think there was ways you could work this around and try to ask the Spurs for Jakob Poeltl. I just don't understand it, and because you just cannot trust the bigs that they have too. Like with Nurkic, he's always hurt, so like it's just so perplexing. It's so perplexing. I don't think there's any winners in this trade, to be honest. Maybe Walker gets to fulfill some of his potential that he had when he was drafted. I know he got some burn in the Pelicans, but kind of the players that were ahead of him were going to get more minutes, and definitely he's in a situation where it doesn't change that much, but maybe he accepts the role as a backup player and tries to grow his game from that.
Yeah, it's this one I actually find pretty interesting because we see so many reports already of the Jazz, the turmoil in the locker room, and Donovan Mitchell potentially wanting a trade in this offseason. And then looking at it, it's like, did they get any better? Not really. They really didn't really do much here at all. They traded essentially this entire time they traded Joe Ingles, who was injured and expiring contract, Elijah Hughes, and 2 second-round picks for Nickeil Alexander Walker, who is actually, like I said before, I actually like him a lot. I think he's a serviceable, a backup guard, but they don't really need too many like backup guards. I mean, look at the guards on their team. Donovan Mitchell. You have Jordan Clarkson, you have Mike Conley. Like, he doesn't really, there's not a ton of playing time for him. And then Juancho Hernangomez doesn't really do anything. Like like it's such a puzzling trade. If they end up getting if they don't really get any better, they actually did get worse because he did lose Joe Ingles, even though he was having a bad year. I mean, he was injured for the rest of the season, but like, it's so weird. For the Spurs, I kind of like it. I mean, you don't really give up too much, and you get Thomas Satoransky, who's a solid backup guard. Like, it's all right, but I think the thing to keep an eye on is how does this affect Donovan Mitchell? How does this affect Utah going forward? Because these reports are coming out, and people, it sounds like players are upset that they did not get any better this trade deadline, and they're not going to win the buyout market. So
Yeah, they definitely are not.
Do you want to go on to the next big trade? It's nothing huge, but I do actually want to get your thoughts on.
Yeah, I'm ready for it.
Cool. So I'll cover this one too. So this trade is the Raptors and the Spurs. So another Spurs trade. But so the Raptors get Thaddeus Young, Drew Ebanks, a 2022 second round pick, and then the Spurs get Goran Dragic and a 2022 first round pick. What do you think about this trade?
Honestly, I would say I like it for both teams. Spurs get another pick where now they could, you know, bolster their talent, right? It looks like the Raptors are going to make the playoffs. They've been playing very well, so who knows if they still stay in that sixth spot that they're in right now. But they look good. They look good. So that pick shouldn't be, a lottery pick.
Yeah.
But adding a guy that hasn't played all season on the Spurs side of it, I don't know how to feel about that with Dragic. Dragic's always been a consummate professional when we've seen him in the league previously. So I hope that he decided to stay in shape and the ramp up doesn't have to take too long and they could integrate him and help out the team. It's just I kind of don't like it in the sense that they gave up White and that's something we're going to talk about later. But it kind of feels like they swapped out White and brought in Dragic, which I don't like that thought process. But as for the Raptors side of things, definitely like adding a guy like Thaddeus Young. He fits right into the mold of what the Raptors like: long, lanky, tall, and able to be versatile in how they defend. They do switch on the Raptors, but the reason why it is effective when they switch is because everyone has the same body type. It's literally that. So they get another guy that's a veteran that knows how to do this, and I think it's gonna help them ultimately. Does he stay long term? I don't think so, but I think he does help them with being a serviceable guy coming off the bench to provide them the same things that they're looking for.
Yeah, I really love this trade for the Raptors specifically. For the Raptors, I mean, man, your team just gets that much better. Thaddeus Young, we saw what Thaddeus Young did for the Bulls last season. He was one of their best players last season. And then Drew Eubanks is like a serviceable guy. Dragic, what I'm actually expecting here, I'm expecting Dragic to probably get bought out. Just thinking about it, of like, this trade was mainly for that first round pick. The Spurs just wanted another pick. There's rumors of like Thaddeus Young potentially being bought out. So now we see, like, all right, they're able to get a first round pick out of it. Like, that seems like the main logic, at least to me. I like it. I like it. Now, Jeff, if Goran Dragic gets bought out, if he does, where do you see him going?
It's funny, but I think he goes back to Miami.
Yeah.
I know there was some rumored teams. The Mavs was like initially picked as like one of the favorites. Um, I don't remember the other couple teams that was thought of as well, but I think it's either coming down to the Mavs or the Heat. But I think the Heat got it.
Yeah, that I can definitely see that. I mean, he fits so well there. They traded him and just goes right back. I mean, that'd be pretty fun. uh, do you want to move on to the next trade?
Yes,
Cool. Because
yes.
there's a lot still here. We still got a decent amount. We haven't even talked about the top things. But next, let's go with the Hornets and the Wizards trade. So the Hornets get Montrezl Harrell. The Wizards get Vernon Carey Jr., who was a second round pick a few years ago, Ish Smith, who actually I think just signed his contract there, and then a 2023 second round pick. So, Jeff, what do you think about this trade?
It's kind of funny because Ishmael's going back to the Wizards in
Yeah,
my mind.
right.
That was like the first thing I saw, and I was like, "Oh wow, that's pretty funny." But it it makes me kind of think about where, like, I knew that there was a little drama in the locker room with the Wizards, but like, how much did Montrezl Harrell fit into that? Because we've seen and heard that he's done some stuff like that in the past.
Yep.
So I wonder if he factored into that, and that one of the reasons why um, they decided to pull the trigger on this. I just think the Hornets win this because they get a guy that has that get it in the gutter, like feel like they needed something like that, because they have good guys, like they have like good players, but they don't have. Sometimes it looks like they're missing what you will need in the playoffs. A
Yeah.
guy that's by all means going to do whatever it takes to win and in a dirty way. like, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's really, really bad. And we've seen where Montrezl Harrell cannot know when to discern when to do that. So that's been a detriment for him in his career. But at the same time, it's good to have a player like this as well, too, because he's going to be like one of those guys, if he buys into being a part of the Hornets, that can be like a heart and soul type of guy. That I think they have the talent. I think they have the flash, but like you need a heart and soul type of guy. He could easily be one of those.
Yeah, they've been looking for like a big man for a long time. They've been wanting this. And is he the exact fit that they wanted of like super athletic big guy that can catch all these lobs? No. But he's probably the next best thing. Like you said, this guy is gonna hustle, he's gonna do all this stuff. He's gonna do all the dirty work for them. I think it's a great fit for the Hornets. I mean, him coming off the bench still, I like it. Looking at I think I saw a tweet from him this morning of like he was literally like yesterday was the most fun he had playing basketball in like a long time. And it's like it kind of goes to show of like how crazy that locker room was for the Wizards and how bad it was because it seemed like nobody there was having fun. But happy to see Montrez have like a good time again, playing somewhere with like fun talent of like LaMelo Ball. You have Terry Rozier, all these guys. I'm happy for him. The Wizards, yeah, there's really not too much of a crazy return here. You get Ish Smith, like you say, who they already had before the second round pick. Like nothing too crazy here. But I think clear winners. I definitely say the Hornets are the winners in that trade.
Clearly.
So, do you want to go on to our 4-team trade here next?
Oh yes, so ready for it.
All right. So, this is a 4-team trade between the Bucks, the Clippers, the Kings, and the Pistons. Now, the Bucks get Serge Ibaka from the Clippers. They get 2 second-round picks, and then they get cash considerations. The Clippers get Rodney Hood, Semi Ojale, and I can't pronounce this guy's name, Vanja Mario, whatever. he's
Deep in the bench. Deep in the bench.
This man's not gonna play, so just a filler guy. The Kings get Dante DiVincenzo, got Josh Jackson, Trey Lyles, David, another guy that's gonna be sitting on the bench, and then the Pistons. This is probably my favorite part of this trade. The Pistons get Marvin Bagley III, the man that we've talked about so many times on this podcast that has been begging to get traded. And then we saw some reports of them not going to trade Marvin Bagley, and it finally happened. Jeff, what do you think about this trade?
It's funny because DiVincenzo finally gets to go to the Kings after I believe it was before the Drew Holiday trade came down. I don't know if people remember this, but the trade failed because either DiVincenzo failed the physical or Brogdon failed the physical, and that went up to the air, right? So now it's interesting to see him going back. So you know what? Honestly, there's a world where we could say the Kings are close to being winners of the trade deadline because the type of talent that they were able to bring back to their team, they increased size while losing size, right? But they increased size in Trey Lyles. They brought in Josh Jackson as a serviceable wing. They brought in a sniper in DiVincenzo. You know, they have now Domantas Sabonis. And you still have De'Aaron Fox. Maybe this gets De'Aaron Fox's blood flowing a little bit more and engaged a little bit more. And then you still have off night. So think about that. That is it. The Kings do look very, very interesting right now. I'm not saying that they're going to win a championship or anything. They just look very interesting right now. So now heading into the Clippers. Another team, is honestly, quietly, but they put together a good trade deadline too, because when you look at the players that they brought in, these guys are going to look good when you are able to bring back I'm blanking on their names, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Rodney Hood definitely is a good, once again, backup type player. But who knows? Some of these guys I don't think are going to stay with the team. I don't know Rodney Hood's contract situation or Semi Ojale's contract situation, but those are two guys that could, give you a good 5-10 minutes a game until they figure out how they're going to tighten up the rotation. Either one of them could see themselves becoming a big part of the rotation. Then looking at the Pistons, thank God, man. Thank God. Free my boy. He's finally free. Bagley has finally left the situation with Sacramento. Hopefully he gets prioritization to the development of his career with the Pistons. I think they'll take him in, and the Pistons fans will take him in with open hands, open arms, and give him the opportunity to grow his game, and I'm happy for that for him. And then the last piece is, the picks are nothing for the Bucks. Yep. The thing that's most important is that they're bringing back Serge Ibaka. Granted, Serge Ibaka is a shell of what he was in the past, but that's another body that they could throw at you during the playoffs. And these big bruising teams, which they are one of those big bruising teams, just got bigger and more bruisier. So it's a good replacement for the time being until Brook Lopez's back injury is settled. So they didn't have to do too much or give up too much to do this. Yes, it sucks losing DiVincenzo, but let's be honest, DiVincenzo wasn't even a part of the championship run. So they probably thought that this was something they could give away that wouldn't hurt them as much.
You mentioned,
but I'm sorry. Yeah. One last thing I'll add. It is interesting that this trade came down because I think I saw reports yesterday that Pat Connaughton just got injured, and I think he broke his hand. Was what it was, you know?
Oh no! With you mentioned with DiVincenzo, of like, he's actually a very good player. He's a very solid player in the NBA. The problem is the man's just always injured. You know, he's so injury prone, and that's what's been stopping him this entire time from being anything more than just like solid. So it is interesting. I would love to see him get that extra look in Sacramento. Definitely like that part. The Clippers part you mentioned of like Rodney Hood and Semi Ojeleye, you weren't sure about their contract situation. I looked it up. Both unrestricted free agents at the end of the season. So for the Clippers, it just kind of, this doesn't really do too much for them. I mean, maybe they just clear up some cap space. So nothing crazy there. I liked what you brought up about like Serge Ibaka taking that role of Brook Lopez, because I think that's essentially exactly what like the Bucks wanted to do here. Because Serge Ibaka now, you know, he shoots a lot of threes and blocks shots. That's all you need in a center or a power forward for this team, because you just have Giannis running down the middle of the floor. He either dunks it or passes it out to a three. So you don't want your big man sitting there at all. This is pretty perfect for them. It's pretty nice. I think it's a good trade. I think it's a good trade all around for all teams. Yeah, it's cool. Do you want to move on to the next trade? It's the Celtics and the Spurs.
Yes. So I'll take this one. So in the interest of time too, I'm going to pair both of them together and just talk to you. The next two are the Celtics. So the Celtics were able to acquire not only Derek White and bring back Daniel Tice, two separate trades. So I'll go through the details of both of them separately. But on the Daniel Tice trade, they were able to obviously bring back Daniel Tice. The Rockets got back Dennis Schroeder, Enes Kanter, who they plan on cutting.
and his freedom.
And his freedom. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And his freedom. And Bruno Fernando are what the Rockets brought back on this trade. And then as for the Derek White trade, Celtics just got back Derek White. They traded Romeo Langford and Josh Richardson, first round pick that is protected by Boston, and then 2028 first round pick swap. What do you think about this, Brian? I think I got a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I actually want to hear more about what you have to say. Just quickly, looking at the Daniel Tice situation of, I like this for the Celtics, and this is good. They get him back. Daniel Tice was actually very good for the Celtics when he played there. For the Rockets, it seems like it's a lot of like, let me clear up some cap space, because like you're cutting. They're cutting Dennis Schroeder. They're cutting Enes Freedom, and then Romeo Langford. I don't know. I mean, he's a good young guy. But Daniel Tice, they get rid of that contract, which was a 4-year, $35 million contract he just signed. So they don't have to do any of that. And also, too, it opens up some playing time for their younger centers. They drafted Usman Garuba. They drafted Alperen Şengün. They have all these guys, so it makes too much sense there. I'll let you handle the rest of this trade.
Okay, so it is good to see that the Celtics are in a good stride right now and they're back where they need to be. But happy for them in that sense.
Yeah.
But what the Tice trade screams of, and something that we spoke about in the past, is when you have someone that is their president of basketball operations is stuck in the past.
Yeah.
And he is constantly showing you he's stuck in the past. When you bring back Al Horford, you bring back Daniel Tice, what is the difference on this team? What is the biggest difference on this team in my mind? So that's so interesting to see that they would do something like that. Yeah. I do like the Derek White addition, though.
Yes.
I do like bringing in Derek White. I saw him playing last night. They actually won last night against the Nuggets, and Derek White looked pretty good and looked like he's been there for a while, to be honest. So he fit in very well on that team. Like you said, Rockets did this to get rid of contracts. They simply just wanted to get rid of contracts. And for the Spurs now, looking on the Spurs side of it, starting to realize Spurs are just trying to get a pick haul in this trade deadline. And they got a couple picks. And let's see what they do. Will they package a few of them? Will they actually just go in there and pick their guys at said spots? But I like this in the sense for the Spurs that they got a young guy in Romeo Langford that a lot of people on the Celtics were high on, but they just did not have the bandwidth to give him time to play. So now he has a better opportunity to play. Primo isn't really what well, I think there was not a lot of people that was thinking Primo was going to be crazy, but I think that he could steal some minutes from Primo, from Keldon Johnson as well, and find himself into the rotation. And then Josh Richardson is Josh Richardson. He's not bad, but he's not great either. So he's just in the middle area.
It's so strange here of like looking at the people that the Celtics traded. You traded Dennis Schroeder, who you just signed, Ennis Freedom, who you just signed, Josh Richardson, who you just signed. Like, these are all moves that Brad Stevens made this offseason to, like you're saying, get back Daniel Tice. And then Derek White was a nice pickup. But, like, it is really strange of what's happening there. I mean, you give up, like, first-round picks and all that. That's what kind of makes it tough. Like, you give up a first-round pick and you get Derek White, like, and Daniel Tice at the end of the day. It's a first round pick and a first round pick swap. So that's where it's like it doesn't move the needle enough. That's what it is. It doesn't move the needle enough. It does make them a better team. They're gonna finish as a play-in team in my opinion. It's just like, are they the 10th seed or are they the 6th seed? That's where it comes down to. I think they'll probably be like, or not the 6th seed, the 7th seed. I think they'll probably be like 7 or 8, but we'll see going forward. Is there anything else you want to touch on there for this trade?
No, I think we're good there. So I'll take this next trade and then I'll save the big one for you.
Okay.
So our second to last trade before the trade deadline went out is a trade that I don't think anyone was really expecting. There were certain aspects that people expected, but just did not expect these two teams to make this trade. So the Mavericks send over Porzingis and 2022 second-round pick to the Wizards, and then the Mavs get Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. When I first saw this, and I had some mock trades with KP that I mentioned to Brian and a few other friends. But this was not the situation where I thought KP was going to land in. And I want to get your thoughts on that, Brian.
Man, this is a weird one. This is a weird one, in my opinion, because one, well, the Wizards get Porzingis, and it's like I like Porzingis still. I think he's still a decent player when healthy. The problem is not healthy very often. Um, this does help their team going forward for the Wizards. Of like you're trying to build. He's about to sneeze in a bit, but oh, it went away. Porzingis, the Wizards didn't really have a good like power forward. I mean, I guess you could say Rui Hachimura, but like I think this kind of builds out their team going forward. Porzingis is still young. For the Mavericks, this is the strangest part for me because yeah, you get rid of Porzingis' giant contract, but you get Davis Bertans has been. You hope he gets a resurgence in his career because he's been so bad since he signed his giant contract. And then Spencer Dinwiddie not having a great season. It's so weird and like I think it's pretty funny to see for the Mavericks of like Mark Cuban was comparing Porzingis and Luca to Nash and Dirk, and he was like, "I'm not gonna make that same mistake again, and not letting those two play together for a longer period of time." And then next, you know, he trades Porzingis. It is crazy. Um, I think with Spencer Dinwiddie, the more interesting thing that I'm looking at is how does this affect them wanting to re-sign Jalen Brunson this offseason? How does this affect? Because Spencer Dinwiddie got a pretty nice payday this offseason. And now you're going to have to pay Jalen Brunson, who also plays one of your guard positions. That's where I'm thinking. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, no, it does create like a logjam on the point guard position. It does also put in Jalen Brunson's mind, like, WTF? Like, why would you guys do this? Like,
Yeah.
where was what's the reasoning behind this one? Because the only thing that I could surmise makes sense of why they would do this is they wanted competition between the two players. But
So,
realistically, like, Jalen Brunson's been playing his heart out this
yeah.
season. Last season, he's towards the end of the year when he had to pick up a bigger load. He was showing that he's competent at this role. So like it's so interesting to see that they would bring in someone like Spencer Dinwiddie in this situation, and that goes back to what I was saying is where I was like so like confused why these two teams would decide to move
Yeah.
with these two players because these two players you knew would be considered to be moved. It's just you didn't think they would be moved to these teams, and the fits kind of weird. KP on the Wizards, especially during this year.
Yeah.
Kyle Kuzma is emerging. He's looking a lot better. Just don't know how KP fits in to that team that same way. Do you drop? I wouldn't. I wouldn't drop Kyle Kuzma to the 3 and then move in KP as a 4. Where does Rory Hachimura fit into that as well? Does that make it a little weird? Like it's just there's too much questions that both moves bring that just don't answer any of the questions that they thought they were solving by sending these players away.
And now that you talk about it more, like the Wizards, it does feel really weird, especially too because Porzingis refuses to play center. He also
Yeah.
can't play center because he can't bang with the centers today. So it's just like it doesn't really work. It doesn't really work.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the contract situation. Davis Bertans still has an extra 3 years at the end of his contract, and they're each like 16 mil, 16 mil, 17 mil. Like, Spencer Dinwiddie still has another 2 seasons on that contract of 18 mil and 18.9 of like I don't really know where they're going. If Davis Bertans does have a career resurgence and he does start hitting threes and playing well, this actually kind of makes sense. I actually do like this because it gives Luka more firepower, and the Mavs are just not generally very great without Luka or anything like that. Like looking at the rest of the roster, But yeah, just going forward. I mean, this did allow the Mavericks to extend Dorian Finney-Smith, which they did want to do, which was 4-year, 55 mil extension. So that's nice to see. It's just overall weird trade. And then Jeff, I sent you the tweet of like a long time ago when Porzingis got traded from the Knicks to the Mavericks. Spencer Dinwiddie was making fun of the Knicks and like with the picture of the dog in the house and like the burning house and saying this is fine. Now Spencer Dinwiddie is getting traded for Porzingis, and it's just the irony. It's too funny. So this is one. I think this is to be determined, but at first look, doesn't feel nice.
I agree. I agree 100%.
Do you want to move on to the big topic of the day?
Yes, I am ready. I am ready.
So this is one we talked about it, I think the last 2 episodes. We've been speculating on it. At one point, which is pretty funny, after we posted the last episode, I think it was that same Monday, Steve Nash was like, our James Harden's not being traded. Like, we're going to keep him. And I thought, oh man, our entire segment where we did this and we talked about this is for nothing because it's all irrelevant now. But now here we are today talking about the Sixers and the Brooklyn Nets did make a trade. The Sixers get James Harden. The Brooklyn Nets get a pretty nice haul back of Ben Simmons, who we've been talking about this entire season. He finally got traded. Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, 2022 first round pick, and a 2027 first round pick. Also, Jeff, do you know, are there any protections on those? I think the 2027 one is protected, but the 2022 is not.
The 2022 is not protected. That's what I saw as well.
What do you think about this whole thing?
I'm going to be consistent with what I've said in the past about Ben Simmons. He's immature.
Mm-hmm.
It's been questionable, some of the decision makings with how he's been handling this trade, about getting this trade. And if he, and I'll be consistent with this too, if he is using the mental health thing as a pawn, that is really bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now thinking to the positives of this is I also want to stand up for the fact that with Ben Simmons is with the mental health issue is a lot of people are starting to talk about it, and there's murmurs. We saw Scoop B's report that he's traveling with the Nets to Miami tonight, and there's people that are alluding that he doesn't have a mental health issue because of that. And I want to make it so clear that no one can assess someone's mental health. No one can truly just unless if you're a trained professional in that field, you can help with that situation. So none of us could speak to what Ben Simmons is going through or is doing or dealing with, right? So I don't understand how people cannot discern that someone can have mental health issues that cripple them so much from wanting to be in a certain situation, right? And now since that situation has changed, they are a little bit better, or they feel like they're ready to break out of that shell. That is clearly something that happens all the time. That it may not be happening in the NBA all the time, but it's definitely something that happens to people, and I hope that the insiders, the reporters that are talking about this choose to be very thoughtful of how they speak about stuff like that. So that's my first thing with this.
Yeah.
For the Sixers, it's a win. They bring in a perennial all-star. They bring in MVP caliber player. They bring in a guy that when you pair him alongside Joel Embiid, it should work. It should lead them to a place of Eastern Conference Finals, championships, right? But because of where he is in his career right now, the window for that opportunity is going to be so short. Mm-hmm. And what it has effectively done is move all of the pressure from where it was on the Nets to get this done right away or win a championship or have championship aspirations right now to now shift it to the Sixers. All right, just had to do a quick pause in our pod. Just to summarize what I was getting at is that this shifts all of the focus on winning the championship and the prioritization to that aspirations to the Sixers for the future, for the near future. I think if we're assuming who's the winner and losers in this situation, for the near future, it is the Sixers. They have a guy that is going to help Joel Embiid unlock that potential to finally win that championship, right? But my God, if he does not do it in the next 2 years, Brian, the Sixers are going to be faced with one of the hardest decisions on, do we re-sign James Harden on that Supermax? Because that Supermax, it was Bobby Marks that spoke about it on ESPN recently, is going to have James Harden at the age of 35, 36, 37, averaging around $60 million on the cap. $60 million, one player, is not a feasible way of winning a championship. So they need to get this done now, and they need to do it as fast as possible. On the net side of things, the win is long-term for me. You have Katie, who signed a 5-year extension, which is a favorable compared to where James Harden's contract will come up. It's favorable compared to that, right? Not only that, the way how KD plays, his evolution into age is going to translate a little bit different than James Harden. The way how James Harden's game is predicated off and what James Harden does on the fitness side and lifestyle side of things speaks to the who may have the longer longevity would be Kevin Durant. But obviously, I would say James Harden does have the Iron Man like label on him. But now, like I said, with the advancing in his age, the way how he's taking care of his body is starting to show that there may be disadvantages to his longevity of what he wants to do with his career and why he's prioritizing winning right now. So back onto the pieces that were moved over and why I think in the long term the Nets are better. Ben Simmons is only 25 years old. We talked about BI being 24. That he has not even entered his prime. Kyrie is, and I always think that people forget this, is Kyrie has not even touched 30 years old yet. If he commits to staying healthy, which Kyrie could take, as we could say, could take 6 months off and come back to the court and look like Kyrie Irving, right? And you have a healthy Kevin Durant. What is stopping them for the next 4 years being in consideration for a championship? That window was decreased when they brought in James Harden because first, you didn't know if he would resign. You didn't know what type of James Harden, which was the question that started to become at this offseason, what type of James Harden you're going to have for the future. And just based off of the role players the Nets have, you just don't know if all the pieces that you need to go for a long run would be there. A lot of those questions was answered when you brought in a guy that helps out on the rebounding side in Andre Drummond. You have a guy that helps with expanding your range and shooters in Seth Curry. Great. Granted, we would have loved to have Thibault thrown into that trade as well, but Seth Curry is a perfect added piece to this trade and just opens up the door to my it opens the door to 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 having snipers on your team such as Steph Curry, Patty Mills, who's been having I would argue the best season of his career, and then also now having when Joe Harris gets healthy, Joe Harris on the court. Think about those three guys and what Ben Simmons could do with them. So I do like what it looks like for the Nets long term, and we'll see what it really becomes. I don't know if it's going to be something for this year, but it definitely opens the door to a lot of opportunities for them for the future.
I agree with pretty much everything you're saying here. I think I touched on it a little bit last season or last episode, where I thought if this trade goes down, I think this is actually even better for the Nets. I think the Nets are more just a more well-rounded team. You have before your entire team is kind of based around three main players, and look what we saw. They only played 16 games together. And even when it was just two of them, two of the three, they looked fantastic still. But you had just so much risk on a couple of these players that were having a bunch of injury problems. Now you look at it. Now you have a guy in Ben Simmons who doesn't get injured too often or anything like that. Who's super young. This is probably the best situation for him just because of, think about it, he doesn't have to score. The main criticism, the main thing everyone always talks about is shooting and scoring, and he still scores a lot of points even though he doesn't shoot threes. But now he's on this team. He doesn't have to have so much asked for him. The things that he already does well fits in perfectly with this team. Ben Simmons is one of the best defenders in the NBA. I honestly, I also had conversations in the past with friends of the show of, if I had to build a team, would I rather have build around Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons? At the time, probably a little crazy now. I always said I'd rather build around Ben Simmons just because of I can see where this is going forward. And then Joel Embiid of the injury problems, which we've seen a million times happen already. I'd rather stick with the Ben Simmons because I know what he can do. I know what he can bring, and that brings to winning basketball. Now, what I am kind of surprised about of this trade that you mentioned, no Matisse Thybulle, no Tyrese Maxey. Those were, at least I thought, one of those two guys were going to be in this trade. I'm a little surprised about that, but still at the end of the day, you have Andre Drummond, Seth Curry. It's still a good enough haul, in my opinion. James Harden for the Sixers, you mentioned. Now this is pretty risky for them because I think this is close to an all-in move. They didn't go completely all-in, but they're pretty close there. If Embiid goes down, that's kind of the season. If James Harden goes down, it's pretty much the season. I mean, they've been playing well without Ben Simmons this entire time, so it actually does help them going forward. I'm actually interested to see how much better this team going forward is because look how well they've been playing without Ben Simmons the entire season. And then we saw them in the past when they had Ben Simmons. They were always close, if not the first seed all the time in the regular season. So, this is pretty interesting there. I think is honestly, at the end of the day, it's a win for both teams at the moment. Going forward, like you said, long-term, James Harden, the injury stuff, his age getting up there, a little scary. James Harden did opt in to his contract. So he opted into his $47.3 million player option for next season. So he's locked in. And then as well, I feel like the Nets kind of needed a change. They've been losing a lot of games, although a lot of their players are injured. They've been losing a lot of games. You guys dropped down to the 8th seed, 29-26. I think going forward, you got rid of what seemed to kind of be some cancerous stuff in the locker room with all this tension. Even if there wasn't like James Harden was talking to the players saying he wanted out and all this stuff and people were angry, still that news was in everyone's head. That news that James Harden wanted out. Now that's gone. Going forward, I'm very excited to see how Ben Simmons looks on this Nets team.
So with that in mind, another thing that I was thinking about is scheme fits, right?
Yeah.
And realistically, James Harden worked because when you have the three of those guys, ultimately they all could shoot, right?
Yep.
So if James Harden is dribbling the ball into the ground, like it doesn't matter because he passes it to Kyrie, he'll fix his spots and he'll make some space, right? Doesn't matter with Kevin Durant either because Kevin Durant is a certified bucket, right? Joe Harris, it didn't matter because he's a spot-up shooter. And then whoever that they had at the five, they had at the five, you know. They would pick and roll. James Harden loves to pick and roll and throwing lobs to them, right? That is effectively gone when you're on the Sixers. There's no way in hell I'm seeing Joel Embiid catching lobs from James Harden because we know what Joel Embiid's knees look like, and I think he would rather stay away from that, right? Not only just that, Harden's main complaint was that there was not enough shooters on the Nets. I think that he's effectively put him in a situation where he's going to realize there's not enough shooters on the Sixers either. Yeah. Tobias Harris can shoot. Does not make him a shooter, you know? As well as Danny Green. I was about to say Danny Granger, but Danny Green is not the three-point shooter he used to be.
Yeah,
he can still hit a three, but he's just not the same player. And then I already talked about the Embiid lobs is not happening. So where does James Harden game really fit in? And then another question is, are you going to take the ball? Are you really going to take the ball away from Maxey after he's proven to look this good? Is James Harden going to be the shooting guard again, or is he going to be the point guard? So there's a lot of people want to think that there's not a lot of questions with the Sixers side of this, but there is. And then you ask the biggest one is if we know that Embiid is injury prone, but if you go to any media outlet that's talking about this situation, no one is keeping that into consideration. Like, there's no one that has brought that up that if Joel Embiid gets hurt, which he did last year, this team doesn't work. Like, it really does not work. And how soon is it till James Harden is upset again?
Yep.
You know?
I mean, look at it. He wanted to leave Houston. And the big thing that he kept talking about is he wants to play beautiful basketball. He wants to play where the ball is moving around. No more ISO basketball. This kind of feels like it's going to be ISO basketball again. You pass the ball to Joel Embiid in the post. He goes ISO. You pass it to James Harden. Now he's just going to dribble and go ISO. Like, this seems like that's kind of the future of that team. And those players are good enough that they can do it. It's just that it doesn't flow the nicest way possible. Does this make the Sixers better? I actually do think it makes the Sixers better. Like you mentioned, although they lose their shooting in Seth Curry, who's probably their best shooter, it's still, I think getting James Harden is still better than anything else. But man, for the Nets, I'm pretty excited for it. I think it's really good. Like you're saying, it's sad that we never got to see these three guys play too much because there is so much potential there. There is so much that those three guys could have done. Man, James Harden picked a weird situation to go to, but hey, I could see them getting close to a championship, but I don't know if it's going to happen at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I do, even though with the concerns that I brought up, I still do see them as a title contender at this point.
Yep.
But now on the Nets side, like you said, with the Ben Simmons, just you said beautiful basketball. It will be beautiful basketball with Ben Simmons. I mocked this in one of our group chats recently. Is that the Nets have essentially made their way of looking like a Warriors of the East, quote unquote, right? Like because I jokingly say they have a Curry, but they have guys that they can rely on for shots. Yeah. They have guys that can create their own shots, and then they have a playmaker that is one of a kind. Like, let's be honest, is that you're not going to walk around and find another Ben Simmons around the league, you know? So, and then I think he plays a brand of basketball that makes the Nets better. He's fast paced. He gets the ball moving. Like, let's think about it. Kyrie is best when he has you not having enough time to think. Yeah. Right? Because he has a slew of an arsenal of moves that he could do, taking it to the hole. Just think about a fast break from Ben Simmons just throwing a dime across the court to Kyrie Irving. He finds a layup and just does his thing, right? And that's what was working with the Nets last year. But as you saw at the beginning of this year, the pace of play is dramatically slower. So if you look back at like all of the crazy plays, the dunks, the alley hoops we were seeing last year, that is not something that's happening this year. I know in the offseason they prioritized getting defensive players, but they traded off too much of their offense for defensive players. That's why we're seeing the issues we're seeing. But now with this haul, I think that this should help with speeding up the game. Those guys that are not traditionally shooters, like a Bruce Brown, like a James Johnson, those type of guys are going to have their ways of making more shots because the pace is just going to be faster. When it's slowed down, guys like that cannot play the same way.
Also, think about it in the sense of, where does Ben Simmons make his money? Driving to the rim. Who is on the Nets that's going to clog the rim? They're like, especially when you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie playing together, like this is going to open up his game a lot more and make it a lot easier for him to drive to the basket rather than Joel Embiid also sitting down there with his defender. Like, it's just going to make, I think it's going to help Ben Simmons a lot. I think it's going to help the Nets a lot. Yeah, overall, I'm a huge fan. I think at the moment, both, like I said, both teams are in a better position than they were before. The Sixers weren't using Ben Simmons. They weren't playing him. Now they have, like you're saying, a top 10 talent in the NBA. Now the Nets are more well-rounded. It seems like they got a special talent, a special young talent. And you don't have to ask too much of him. Because that's where it seemed like the problem came from when he was in Philly, where they asked too much of him. He didn't live up to it. Now, just give the ball to Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant is going to find a way to score that basketball. Ben Simmons is going to play against their best defender. That's pretty scary to me.
Agreed.
Ooh, I'm excited to see when this first game happens. What is it? Or I'm excited to see when Ben Simmons actually plays his first game for the Nets. And then I'm also excited to see, what is it, March 10th, is it, or something, when Philly and Brooklyn plays? Because it's really, the Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid hatred is legit. James Harden versing his old team, the Brooklyn Nets. That's so exciting to see. Man, this was a good trade deadline. This was a very good trade deadline. Real quick, do you want to touch on your thoughts of the Lakers not making a trade deadline trade and where they go for it?
Yeah, it's very, very telling that they did not decide to make a move. And actually, I think Rob Pelinka pinned out something to the fans where he spoke about the players coincide like with them, and they decided it was the best decision not to move anyone and stand pat. So today there was a report that shows that actually LeBron James and AD did not coincide with that and did not approve of standing pat. And that just, it just speaks to the dysfunction that's happening in this company and that organization. It's I've been saying this for a while now. It's like no one takes a look at Rob Pelinka deep.
Yeah.
Like, Rob Pelinka has not done a great job. A lot of the things that has been put essentially done, quote unquote, done by Rob Pelinka was by influence of other people. Rich Paul is a bigger part of the reason why AD is a part of the Lakers than Rob Pelinka is the reason why they're there. And honestly, let's think about it. They kind of got fleeced. Like, they kind of got fleeced because we look at all the talent they gave up, and all of those guys somewhat look good on a different team, So it's so interesting. It's so crazy to see that no one ever talks about him. I just cannot understand that. And I think that this might be very well his last season there.
It should be his last season. Will it be his last season? To be determined. What I did find was really funny because you mentioned of like that report saying that they did not, or Rob Pelinka pretty much lied, saying that AD and LeBron agreed with making no trades. You can clearly see that LeBron just the other day when they versed the Bucks after the game, he was like, "We're not the same caliber team as them. I could have told you before coming into this game that we would have lost." Like, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's kind of pretty close to what LeBron was saying. So,
Yep.
if he doesn't think he can match up against the Bucks, who were the champions last season, how does he think he's going to match up against anywhere else? Of course he wanted a trade. Of course he wanted moves. Then even looking at this buyout market, really isn't a whole lot. Really isn't. Like, right now there's the report of the Lakers looking to bring back Dennis Schroeder. We saw how well that worked out the first time. We saw how well that works out for the Celtics when they just signed him. Like,
Yep.
it makes no sense. It's really bad. The Westbrook situation was terrible. They're not playing him in the fourth quarter. They're not doing any of this stuff in late game situations. Like, the Lakers are a complete mess. Trades needed to happen. The thing is, there kind of was no trade available. They really think about it. They're trying to trade Taylor Horn Tucker. No one wants him. Trying to trade Westbrook, probably one of the worst contracts in the NBA right now. They're like, they don't really have anything. They're trying to trade a 2028 first round pick or whatever it is. Like, no one wants these things. Like, it's so bad.
It's egregious how bad this team was constructed. Like, it's so bad. And like you mentioned, we talk about THT a lot here, but it's the truth. Is like a player like that they've made us to believe is some prospect of being amazing.
Yeah.
And he has not shown any of that. It is ridiculous. And it shows even more because he has no value in the market. No one wants him. Nobody wants him. Think about how many times people have the Lakers have thrown that or waved that in front of a team, and no one has won it. But I'll give you another thing too that I think will be a key reason why Rob Pelinka gets fired. If there's ever a report that comes out before this season ends, why the Knicks and Lakers trade fell apart, and it is on the Lakers because they did something where it made it the trade just die. Rob Pelinka, it's off with his head at that point. They're going to get rid of him. They're going to have to get rid of him because it's just the management of this team, the management, the construction, the direction is all messed up. And it's crazy to see this with a LeBron-led team.
Yeah, it's really with that, at least my thoughts on like why these trades didn't go down is like we saw from all the reports in the past of the Lakers valued their players that no one wanted way too highly. I feel like it's another sneeze about to come in. Oh man. Okay. So yeah, they
Bless
valued. Thank you. They valued their assets. Not really. They're not really assets. They value them way too highly. And what it seemed like too, the Knicks, what were thought to be probably like decent contracts and everything, all those guys were playing really bad. So now their value just goes down even more. So now their contracts don't look too nice because, especially too, they are really 2-year contracts, and we see all the contracts that got traded this trade deadline, all expiring. If you have an expiring contract, that was probably the most valuable thing you can trade. And then looking at it, all these guys that the Knicks did, because you can look at it coming into the off season, coming into the season, they shouldn't have been expecting to make trades right away. A lot of those trades were all those contracts were made to be traded later on, like 2-3 years when they're about to be expiring contracts. So that's just where definitely that made it tough. And I'm sure the Lakers are trying to get the Knicks to take Westbrook, and I don't think the Knicks wanted to do that. The way it seemed like from all the reports that the Knicks wanted to just create an open roster spot for Cam Reddish. So I'm interested to see what happens because it feels like Cam Reddish is going to sit on the bench for the rest of the season, barring any injuries or anything like that. And then they also wanted to create cap space so they can go after Jalen Brunson in the offseason. So we'll see what happens there, if they'll make some offseason trades or not. But so far, at least for those both teams, the Knicks and the Lakers, pretty bad. No trades or anything like that. And I guess we'll see going forward. But definitely, I can see the Knicks missing the play-ins, and the Lakers either losing in the play-ins or a first-round exit. And it's pretty crazy to see that a lot of people had the Lakers probably winning the championship before the season to now like them barely being in the play-in. Crazy where how far a season can go.
Well, my prediction was that they were going to meet the Nets in the playoffs.
True.
I mean, in the finals. So that obviously is not happening. So I agree. Yeah, it's crazy to think and see where all of this has gone and how everyone is impacted. And now, as the Rebel settles, like what's up next for everyone? Like who's going to make themselves who has made themselves a legitimate contender for the rest of this season, and where they see themselves. So I guess that's it.
Yeah, it's to be determined. I do want to talk about this more going forward. We're a little bit long already again, but this one was a lot of fun. Jeff, do you have anything you want to say before we close out this episode?
So one thing before, I hope you've seen this clip. If you haven't, I advise the listeners to see this clip too. Is after the NBA Today trade deadline special on ESPN, they started to speak about the Lakers did not make a move, and they're going to focus their attention to the buyout market. And from there, a very funny moment ensued. Please, if you have a computer, if you have a phone, please go search up RJ and Kendrick Perkins. Lakers shift their focus to the buyout market, and you're going to be in for a good laugh, a really good laugh. And then next thing I would say is just to finish, to put it all together, is like you have a clear winner and loser of this trade deadline.
I kind of want to say at the moment, I feel like Daryl Morey kind of might be a winner a little bit, mainly because look how much he held out the entire time while everyone was making fun of him, including me, making fun of Daryl Morey of like wanting so much for Ben Simmons. At the end of the day, like there was talks about Ben Simmons being traded for maybe CJ McCollum, Ben Simmons being traded for Buddy Hield. Like this was the return people were saying. At the end of the day, although he did include more assets, he was able to get James Harden at the end of the day. I do think Daryl Morey is probably the biggest winner. What do you think of the biggest winner?
Biggest winners in this situation are James Harden and Ben Simmons. They both got what they wanted. I actually am on the opposite side of that.
Okay.
Biggest loser is Lakers, obviously.
Yeah.
And in my mind, it's Daryl Morey because now the ticking time bomb is on. It could go either one way or the other, right? He definitely got what he wanted.
Yep.
But if it does not go right, he could see himself looking so bad if he allowed for Ben Simmons to walk and go to the division rival. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
He would have to see him 4 times a year for the next 4 years if he's even there that long, if James Harden does not work. So,
Yeah.
And then not only that too, a little bit of James Harden is a loser too in my mind, is he has now created an enemy out of the best player in the world right now, Kevin Durant. I'm sure you guys have seen that as well. The All-Star draft where KD does his KD stuff, and you know, if you stay petty, you don't need to be petty, you know. So KD definitely stays petty, and he did not select my boy James Harden. So it should be some spicy games that we see from the Nets and the Sixers for the upcoming years, and should really, this might be the most motivation I've seen KD have in a couple of years. So I'm looking at the chops for March 7th. Like, it's gonna be a great game.
You know what? I'm actually curious now that we're talking about it. Well, one, I agree with your Daryl Morey actually has the potential to be the biggest loser looking back at this. I just think as of now, like you're saying, because he got what he wanted. He waited this entire season, he got what he wanted, but he does have the biggest potential to look terrible. What do you actually think? Because we see James Harden just got traded to the Nets last season. They traded Karis LeVert and Jared Allen, who are looking amazing now for Cleveland. What do you think about those guys and what the Nets had previous to trading for James Harden to what they have now with Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, and Andre Drummond?
Ironically, they essentially traded those 3 players for these 3 players. So I would say it literally is a similar team. It's just different players that may be a little bit better, maybe, just maybe, but it's the picks that you think back to. It's now the picks are the problem with that situation, because you lose 3 players, you get back 3 players, but those picks you can't get them back. But granted, in Sean Marks I trust. He always finds a way to find the right guys to draft, and I know the guy can draft someone in the 31st pick and get someone like Nick Claxton, and I believe that he'll do that in these next couple of seasons as well. So,
yeah, those margin move trades are what makes a championship team versus what can kill a team.
Great.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I guess the last thing, the hidden real loser is the Houston Rockets, because if they just pulled the trigger on the trade last season, they would have got the same player that the Nets have now.
That is probably the biggest atrocity yet that we've seen. Like, that's so bad that they literally, what did they end up with? They ended up with nothing. With literally like nothing. And that's so bad. I feel terrible for them. One of my other probably my biggest losers, Portland Trailblazers. Like, the Portland Trailblazers, what did they do this entire time? They completely, I think their plan going forward is a terrible plan. I think it's gonna hurt them for like the next 5 years until they decide to trade Dame. And then when they trade Dame, Dame's gonna be a lot older, his value's gonna be down. I think this is the time to blow it up. We'll see going forward, but if they do decide to try to build around Dame this offseason, it's gonna go terribly.
Yep, I agree.
A fun one. I like this one. I'm always happy when we don't give each other too many of our thoughts before we go on the pod, because I learned so much. So this is fun.
Definitely.
All right, this was episode 20.
Peace.